So would Bitcoin be better if every Bitcoin was backed by a specific amount of gold or some other commodity, silver, whatever it is? Interestingly enough, the answer is no. It would actually be, Bitcoin would actually be much worse if that were the case. But I still get that question from people sometimes. And they ask me, they're like, hey, I know it's backed by this massive computer network, all this incredible hash rate, all these nodes all over the world, the power that backs the whole system, cryptography. It's basically backed by all this insane stuff that is super cool and, sort of super solid, super secure, super audited. But some people still ask me, they said, in spite of all that, they would feel better if each Bitcoin was backed by an ounce of gold or something like that. That would actually make Bitcoin much, much worse rather than better. And the reason I haven't done a video explaining why is it's a little bit technical and it's a little bit in depth, and typically I do all these videos ad hoc. And so, I don't have anything printed. In this case, I printed something in advance because I want to read it. So I'm going to tackle it in this video, and hopefully it'll be helpful. Again, it's probably most of my videos I calibrate for sort of, beginner level content or people who are new to Bitcoin as of the last year or two. This one's more, intermediate level, probably more geared toward people who have been involved with Bitcoin for, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 years rather than just 1 or 2 years. But anyway, I'll try to keep it simple. Okay, so first we need to understand, why did gold fail? And in order to understand why gold failed, gold has some very, very, very important deficiencies when it comes to money. Now, prior to a digital economy, when the transactions, basically the transaction and the transaction settlement happened at the same time, gold was good enough because essentially people were transacting, and if you hand somebody gold at the exact same time that you're buying a product or a service, then that means that the transaction and the settlement are happening at the same time. So what do I mean by settlement? Settlement is the amount of time it takes until everybody is all settled up. So the speed of settlement is incredibly important when it comes to a monetary system. So let me use an example. The speed of settlement is the difference in time between when the transaction actually takes place and when everybody is all settled up, everybody's good, and everybody feels good about it. So if you are at a dinner with, 6 or 10 people, and they require you to put the meal all on one tab, your speed of settlement is typically 1 or 2 hours. For example, you're typically not Venmoing or PayPaling or Cash Apping whoever is hosting the dinner every time you order something, right? If that were the case, if every time you said, hey, I'll have another lemonade, you immediately Cash Apped $2 to whoever was hosting the dinner, then the transaction and the settlement would be happening simultaneously. But if, which is almost always the case, everybody, has a nice meal, hangs out for 2 or 3 hours, and then they settle up in the parking lot, which is, hey, let's all put in $20. And everybody, sends $20 or $25 or whatever it is to whoever the host is. And that's when the settlement happens. So that gap between when people were actually ordering and consuming food and when they all settled up in the parking lot and the money changed hands is called the speed of settlement. So gold has a huge, huge problem with speed of settlement, which is the only reason that fiat currencies ever became a thing. If gold was as fast at settlement as fiat currencies, nobody would, and fiat currencies means made up currencies like the US dollar or any other paper currency, which is essentially all of them. And right now there's about 160 fiat currencies around the world. 160. Nobody would have gotten off the gold standard if gold's settlement speed were significantly faster. But it is not. And it is not because of the inherent properties of gold. So if you look at what makes a good money, here are some of the elements. Okay, is it divisible? Gold is not very divisible, which means you tend to only settle up with gold in large amounts, not in small amounts, because gold is just, by the unit, it's not good for like a cup of coffee. So, and even for, when central banks and stuff settle up with gold, they tend to do it every 6 months or every couple of years, and they do it in massive tons of gold at a time, right? Nobody's settling up gold as they go. Portability. Gold is very heavy, which means it's hard to transport in large volumes over time. Gold is very durable, so that's a characteristic that it gets a plus on. You can't burn it, you can't, incinerate it like, if you have gold, it's basically indestructible. So that is one characteristic that does make that gold scores well on. Fungibility, meaning are all units of gold the same? The answer is once they're authenticated as gold, yes, so it scores well on that. But it has huge problems with verifiability, which means it's really hard to figure out if what you think is gold actually is gold, which again is another reason that the settlement time is so long, because it's heavy, it's not divisible, and it's hard to verify. It means that typically back when the world was on a gold standard, people would only settle up every, measured in months or years. And between that, instead of settling up, they would essentially use paper receipts. And everybody would keep track of how much gold they owed each other in paper receipts, trusting that when they did want to settle up, that the other side actually had the gold. Well, of course, that's the huge problem with money, and that's the problem with every money that is based on anything physical like gold, is that, in this case, the US dollar printed way more dollars than there was gold. So initially, gold, at the time of the founding of the United States in 1776, an ounce of gold was worth $20.67, 20.67. So $20.67, and at any time, you were supposed to be able to convert a US dollar into an ounce of gold at that rate anywhere at any time. That's what it meant. A US dollar was representing, $20.67 represented 1 ounce of gold. Okay, well then they printed too much money because the settlement speed of gold was slow. They printed too much money, and then after World War II in 1933, they forced, we'll get to that. They revalued gold at $35 an ounce. But actually, before that, because all of the gold was not being settled up real time, because people were not taking physical possession and the gold was not spread across hundreds of millions or billions of people, but instead, because the settlement times were happening infrequently, only measured in months or years, the vast majority of the gold was sitting in vaults in a very small number of banks. So the United States figured out, hey, we could swoop in and take everyone's gold, which is exactly what they did. Executive Order 6102, 6102. So Executive Order 6102, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, one of the worst presidents, or possibly the worst president that has ever presided over America. Almost everything he did was horrible. But anyway, FDR signed Executive Order 6102, which forced all Americans to turn in their gold to the United States at a price of $20.67. So essentially, they forcibly confiscated gold with a forced buyback program. And it was really easy to do because people were not settling with gold real time. It was really easy to do because all the gold was centralized. And so they could just go take it. And they didn't actually chase individuals, although, if you did not turn in your gold, you were subject to 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, which I think inflation adjusted is obviously like, hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, whatever it is. But anyway, inflation adjusted $10,000 is massively, massively, massively more expensive now than it was back then. But it was a $10,000 fine, which was basically, years and years and years of wages equivalent at the time, and 10 years in prison if you did not turn in your gold. So everybody was forced to turn in their gold at $20.67 an ounce. And the U.S. government gave them $20.67 for each ounce of gold that they turned in. And then immediately when they were done forcibly confiscating everyone's gold, they revalued gold to $35 an ounce. So basically, they bought the gold, they forcibly bought it at a discount from Americans in 1933, and then immediately revalued it closer to what it was actually trading for on the market, which was $35 an ounce. Now, they continued to print way too much money. Now, the gold was now centralized at Fort Knox. They continued to print vast amounts of new money. But the promise was, okay, U.S. citizens are not allowed to own gold, but countries can own gold. And they set up the Bretton Woods system in 1945 after World War II, or maybe 1946. And basically the agreement was, hey, we'll all be on, everybody will link their currency to the U.S. dollar, and then the U.S. dollar will be linked to gold. And any country can turn in U.S. dollars at an exchange rate of $35 per ounce of gold. And so that was the promise. The promise is if you'll trust the U.S. dollar Now the U.S. government has proven themselves not to be worthy at that point. They told the U.S. citizens to trust them, and then they took away all their gold. And then they told all the countries, for actual countries, not U.S. citizens, to trust them, and that anytime they needed their gold, they could get it at a rate of $35 an ounce. So a bunch of countries, being that it was right after World War II, they were nervous about all their gold, and so they let the United States hold their gold for them. So the U.S. government sat on a bunch of gold, and their assumption was that their U.S. dollar reserves that they were holding, the U.S. dollar reserves, they could convert at $35 an ounce to gold. And so they would just hold a lot of U.S. dollar reserves, and they felt more comfortable doing that after World War II, because obviously if a war happens, somebody can come in and just take your gold, versus if you got U.S. dollars, it's, they can sort of cancel that out and stuff like that. So a bunch of countries were holding U.S. dollars instead of gold, assuming that they could convert those U.S. dollars to gold or convert their own currencies at their pegged exchange rate to the U.S. dollar for gold as well. So the U.S. government, as they always do, as every human does, it's not a U.S. government problem, it's a human sin, human fallen nature problem. Every fallen human who has the ability to magically print money out of thin air eventually will. And so they did. So the U.S. government printed vast amounts of money. And then in 1971, I believe it was France, actually was ready to settle. We're talking about speed of settlement here. So they sent a ship over to pick up their gold. Here's a bunch of U.S. dollars, and we want our gold at $35 an ounce. Well, the U.S. government had printed way more U.S. dollars than there was gold, and so they could not redeem the French demand for their gold. They could not keep that promise. The U.S. government had already defaulted on the people of the United States by taking away their gold and not allowing them to redeem it at market rates, but instead of basically cheating everybody out at $20.67 an ounce instead of $35 an ounce. So now the U.S. government decided in 1971 they were going to cheat all the other countries of the world out of their gold, which they did. So the U.S. government went off the gold standard in 1971, and it did what's called closing the gold window, which is basically they said, hey, we have a teller window open for all countries, and anybody who wants to exchange U.S. dollars for gold can do this at this window, this, not physical window, but sort of, I guess mental window. You have this window, this opportunity to come exchange gold for $35 an ounce. And you can do that anytime you want. And then in 1971, they said, no, you can't. So they told France and everybody else that, hey, all those U.S. dollars that you thought represented gold, guess what? They don't anymore. They don't represent anything. They represent a made-up currency that we made out of thin air, and we faked it. We faked it, and we printed a ton of it, and we told you it represented gold, and now we're telling you we lied, and that wasn't true, and you can't have your gold. So that happened in 1971, and obviously since then, the price of an ounce of gold has gone from $35 per ounce all the way to $2,500 an ounce. So obviously gold is, much more expensive now. All right, so the question is, back to the question is, why is it not a good idea, if gold's gone to $2,500 an ounce, way up from its 1971 price, why is it not a good idea to have a currency, a day-to-day, usage currency that is backed by gold? And the answer is for the exact same reason that gold failed before. Gold, because, to recap, because it has divisibility problems, because it has portability problems, because it has verifiability problems. It's really hard to figure out if it actually is gold unless you melt it down. And actually gold is less scarce than Bitcoin. Gold's probably scarce enough. They pull about 1.5% to 2% more gold out of the ground every year. So that's, not as scarce as Bitcoin, where Bitcoin only about 0.75% more Bitcoin right now is generated every year, and that number drops in half every 4 years. But anyway, gold is potentially scarce enough, but it has flaws in the verifiability, the portability, and the divisibility, and so it cannot be used for settlement. And so as a result, if Bitcoin was backed by gold, the gold would have to be somewhere. So Bitcoin is a decentralized currency, but the gold would have to be somewhere. And any gold that has to be somewhere creates the exact same centralization risk that we had before. The exact same reason that gold failed before, because it was all stored in a relatively small number of places that could be taken away, is exactly what would happen again. So recently there was a debate. It's not worth watching, but you can, look it up if you're interested. But there was a debate between Jack Mallers, the founder and CEO of Strike, Strike, and Peter Schiff, who is known as one of the sort of, strongest anti-Bitcoin voices out there. So they were debating with, Jack Mallers in favor of Bitcoin and Peter Schiff against Bitcoin. And Peter Schiff's business is selling people gold. So of course, that's part of his entire business model is telling people they need to buy gold because the world's going to go back to gold. Well, here's a news flash. The world will absolutely positively not go back to gold. And here's the reason why. Gold does not work in a digital economy because of the settlement time. Because you end up with a currency that is backed by something that you can really only settle up every few months or every few years. It is so difficult to transport. So, for example, what if Bank of America and JP Morgan were trying to settle up gold reserves? Well, the problem is Bank of America is headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, and JP Morgan, I believe, is headquartered in New York. Well, that would mean if you wanted to try to settle up, let's say every week, let's say every Friday afternoon they're going to settle up, there would be a massive caravan of armored cars, machine guns, 50 calibers, the whole works, going back and forth between New York and Charlotte, North Carolina every weekend as they transported tons of physical gold back and forth every weekend, depending on how many of their customers had transacted in, currency with the customers of JP Morgan versus Bank of America. Well, they're not going to do that. I promise you they are not going to do that. What they're going to do is say, hey, let's all just agree on how much gold each of us has. Let's let someone else hold on to it. Maybe the U.S. government at Fort Knox, maybe, just the bank of JP Morgan, or, maybe they pick a third party bank, whatever. The gold's going to be somewhere. Even if the gold is in Switzerland, in the Brinks vault, sitting underneath the airport in Switzerland, it's still somewhere, right? If all the gold in the United States, they said, hey, we don't trust each other, we're all going to use the Brinks vault underneath the runway in Switzerland, which is where Brinks has a big vault. The U.S. government can still go over there and say, hey, Executive Order 6102 2.0, which is, hey, we're going to confiscate all the gold that's sitting in this massive vault in Switzerland, and Switzerland would give it up because that gold is owned by U.S. citizens, which means at the end of the day, the U.S. government has the right to come take it away if they claim they do, which is what they did with Executive Order 6102. It said, hey, if you have gold, we're taking it. So gold's settlement time is a problem that is unsolvable. And in a non-digital economy, it was barely passably good enough. But as soon as the invention of the telegraph happened, where transactions could happen across an ocean with an undersea cable in a matter of minutes, but the actual gold did not cross the ocean for a matter of months or years, you had this massive difference between transactions and settlement times. And that massive difference between transactions and settlement times ultimately led to the fact that something represented the gold while the gold did not move. And as soon as you have anything that represents gold, but the actual physical gold is not physically moving, then whatever represents the gold is going to get printed too much of. It's just 100% guaranteed that whatever it is, if it represents gold, but it's not gold itself, then that thing will get printed too much of, and you'll end up with massive amounts of inflation, and there will not be enough gold to redeem, to redeem. So that's what's happened historically. That's what always happens. That is what will happen again. And so Peter Schiff, in this debate with Jack Mallers that happened a week or two ago, Peter Schiff says, look, we can solve gold's problem of being, not portable, not authenticatable, and not divisible. We can solve it with a cryptocurrency network that represents gold. The problem was, and Jack Mallers did a fantastic job in the debate, but the question he should have asked, the one question he should have asked that he did not, that I wish he had asked, to Peter Schiff was, hey, Peter, where are we going to put the gold? That is always the problem with the gold standard is, where is the gold? If the gold is at major U.S. banks, which is a logical place to put it, it's going to get taken away just like it got taken away before. And anyone who tells you that a government has done something before but will never do it again is ridiculous. That is like a liar telling you, look, I lied to you before, but I will never lie again. Or a cheater telling you, I cheated on you before, but I will never cheat on you again. It doesn't mean it's automatically not true, but why would you trust a liar to tell the truth, a cheater to not cheat, or somebody who has scammed you not to scam you again? So if the U.S. government says, hey, look, we get it. we took away all your gold once upon a time, but we promise not to do it again. Why would you ever believe that? Like, you are a complete sucker if you believe that the US government took away everyone's gold once, but that if it becomes the new monetary system of the world again, and if there's World War III, and if the US government ends up needing it or feeling like they need all of that gold again, it is absolutely ridiculous, and you are a sucker if you don't think that they're going to take your gold away again. They did it once, they will absolutely do it again. I mean, again, the best way of predicting whether someone will do something is, have they done it before? If they've done it before, there's a great chance they'll do it again. At least a high probability. So, the question that Jack Mallers should have asked Peter Schiff was, okay, if there's some cryptocurrency that's backed by gold, which of course Peter Schiff would like because he sells gold to people, so if there was a cryptocurrency backed by gold, people would obviously need to buy lots of gold to back the cryptocurrency, and the price of gold would go up, and Peter Schiff's customers who have bought a bunch of gold from him would make money. So that's his business model. But the question Jack Mallers should have asked is, Peter, where are we going to put the gold? Is it going to end up at the Brinks Vault under the runway in Switzerland? If so, why is the U.S. government not just going to confiscate it because it's owned by U.S. citizens? At least all the gold that is owned by U.S. citizens. That doesn't mean they'd confiscate the gold of people who are not U.S. citizens. But if people are U.S. citizens and the U.S. government goes to Switzerland and says, hey, we need you to give up the gold of all of these people, they're U.S. citizens, Switzerland's going to give it to them. So that is the core problem with using gold, is that the gold has to be somewhere. And wherever the gold they're only settling up to the gold every month, every so many months or every so many years, and that they can get away with printing a ton of it. And in the case of gold, if there's enough of it stored in vaults, you can actually print a ton of it in the case of the United States for decades. Decades until somebody like the French government shows up and says, hey, we actually want the gold. And then the US government's like, we actually pretended we had your gold, but these US dollars we've been printing out of thin air don't actually represent gold, and we're not going to give it to you. Presented $35, per ounce of gold. We're not giving any of you that gold. And that's what the US government did, and that's what they will do again. So the core problem with gold is it has to be somewhere. And if it has to be somewhere, it will centralize. And if it centralizes, it will be confiscated when the next time someone needs or feels like they need to have a bunch of money that they do not have the ability to print out of thin air. They will confiscate it, just like the United States already did one time with Executive Order 6102. %8 is stored in cold storage with things like Bitkey, which is the, bitkey.world, the website, the cold storage device I recommend. So, and if it started to look like the US government might confiscate Bitcoin, I can promise you that almost all of the Bitcoin that is stored on centralized exchanges would magically evaporate into the ether into cold storage with things like Bitkey, because people would pull it off of those exchanges, literally in a heartbeat. You couldn't do that with gold, right? The word Bitcoin is not mentioned in the U.S. Constitution, so the U.S. government does not have the legal grounds. They never had the legal grounds to confiscate gold, just to be clear. They never had the legal grounds, but they claimed they did because the word gold was mentioned in the Constitution. And of course, if a word's mentioned in the Constitution, they basically made it up and said, hey, the Constitution uses the word gold, it connects it to money, we control the money, therefore we have the right to take everyone's gold away, which is obviously a ridiculous assertion. But in the case of Bitcoin, not only technologically, Bitcoin, and therefore the probability that, Bitcoin is, can be confiscated by the U.S. government. Not only is it technologically impossible, it's also legally impossible. without, again, just blatant expropriation. But at that point, if they're taking Bitcoin, they're taking everything, including your house, your stocks, your bonds, your, real estate portfolio. They would have the same rights to all of your property if they have rights to your Bitcoin. So anyway, plus it's technologically impossible to take it, unlike your other stuff, which they actually summary, because I know this is at least intermediate level, if not higher. So the core problem with gold is the problem of settlement. There's no way to transact instantaneously with gold. And so fiat currencies were used instead because they represented gold. And you could wire US dollars across, for example, across a telegraph. You could send money with a telegraph or a telegram or the internet or instead of gold, until the US government got everybody addicted to fiat currencies due to the speed at which they could settle up. And then the government rug pulled everybody in 1971, which means it pulled the rug out from under them all of a sudden. And it took away everybody's, it took away the link to gold. Ultimately, the U.S. did restore, I think in 1976, the ability of citizens to own gold. But at that point, it was not linked to the U.S. dollar. So you could own it, but you could not exchange U.S. dollars for it for anything other than just whatever the market. Since back in 1933 to my whatever great grandparents, I'm here in 1976. I want that gold back, and I want to pay you exactly what I got for it, which is $20.67. Obviously, the U.S. government did not do that. They just screwed everybody over, and that was that. So anyway, so gold's speed of settlement will never work in the modern economy, and therefore it will be represented by an abstraction such as paper money, and that paper money will always get printed an unlimited amount of, and the gold has to be stored somewhere central, and therefore it can be taken away. And plus, the speed of settlement is such that there is no way of proving how much gold there is, and whether the U.S. dollars or whatever it is is backed by gold. For example, if we were using BitGold instead of Bitcoin, and it actually was backed by gold, there's no way of proving that. So even companies out there that are attempting to do that, like a company called Glint, is basically saying, look, we'll store your gold in Switzerland, and then you can use a debit card to spend your gold, and we'll settle it up in the background. The problem is there is absolutely no way to prove that you have gold in Switzerland. There is absolutely no way to prove that they're not claiming that 1,000 people, that if you show up in Switzerland and say, where's my gold, they show the exact same gold brick to everybody and say, this is your gold. And the next guy walks in the door and they show the same piece of gold and say, look, this one's your gold. And then 1,000 people later, they're showing the exact same gold to that exact same person. And so unless everybody tries to settle up all at the same time, which creates a bank run on the gold, and then everybody finds out they don't have the gold all at the same time, but at that point, 999 out of 1,000 people don't get the gold because only the very first person who asked for it gets it back. Everybody else finds out that their money doesn't actually represent gold. So anyway, so gold does not work due to settlement. So I want to read a portion of the book Broken Money by Lyn Alden. Lyn Alden is a fantastic economist. She writes great stuff. I love her work. I follow her on Twitter, and I read her book called Broken Money. And anyway, she is one of the big brains in the world of Bitcoin. So anyway, I read her book, and there was one passage from it that speaks to this specifically that I wanted to read right now, which again is not something I usually do, but I thought this was good. And it's a summary, and again, this is more of an advanced talk anyway. Okay, so here it is. Lyn Alden in Broken Money says, if I were to describe in one paragraph why money has been broken around the world for so long, why almost everything else has been improved substantially, including energy abundance, technology abundance, and so forth, it is due to this gap between transaction and settlement speeds that the telecommunication era created. For a century and a half, the world had been stuck at a local maximum that has required and incentivized even more complex form of centralized abstraction to bridge the gap, and that is the gap between settlement time, transaction time, and settlement time. The international gold standard worked for several decades during peacetime, but was inherently flawed from the start due to how many claims, give me a second here, how many claims it enabled to exist on such a small monetary base of actual gold, and it failed its first test as soon as war broke out between the major powers in Europe. The Bretton Woods system, which is the system I talked about in, I think it was 1946, where everybody linked their currencies to the US dollar, and then the US dollar was supposed to be linked to gold. It says the Bretton Woods system was even more flawed due to even greater levels of abstraction and managed to fail in less than a decade and a half after full implementation. The modern system of 160 different, ever devaluing fiat currencies loosely tied to one world reserve currency is highly flawed due to having no inherent grounding and scarcity. That's the problem with fiat currencies. There's no inherent grounding and scarcity. They're all just made up. The invention of Bitcoin as an open source fast settlement network with its own scarce units provides the first credible way to close the gap between transaction and settlement speeds. So, Bitcoin, the first opportunity we've ever had to close this gap between transaction speeds and settlement speeds, means Bitcoin is the first shot we have of something that could actually potentially work as money without creating this problem. This problem where the stuff, the gold, has to be somewhere centralized, and it's represented by something like paper money that is spread everywhere. And then, of course, the money gets devalued over time because a huge amount of money gets created that is not backed by gold. And there's no way you find that out until something like 1971, where the whole world finds out from Richard Nixon, all at the same time, that all of their US dollars are backed by nothing. So literally, the day before he announced it in 1971, everyone thought that if they had enough US dollars, they could redeem them $35 per ounce of gold. And if you were a U.S. citizen, you could obviously, you could go to somebody internationally and give them your U.S. dollars, and they could come redeem them. Essentially central banks internationally could redeem them. And the U.S. government told everybody all at the same time, nope, rug pull, you're screwed. You cannot have your gold. We are not giving you gold at $35 per U.S. dollar. We're giving you nothing in exchange for your U.S. dollars. Your U.S. dollars represents just the made-up money that we made up, and you can use it to buy stuff, but we're going to print a ton more of it. It's going to constantly devalue, and we're not going to give you the gold you thought you could get as that you thought it represented. So, to summarize a long and complex video here, which again is the reason I haven't done this one, is because I knew it was going to be long. I knew it was going to be complex. It's more of an intermediate level versus a beginner level. A lot of people would just not want to sit through this. But finally, I found the passage in Broken Money, the book by Lyn Alden, and that's Lyn, L-Y-N, Alden, A-L-D-E-N, and the book is called Broken Money. I finally found the passage I read you, which is a good summary of it, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and tackle this topic. So anyway, to summarize, would Bitcoin be better if every Bitcoin was backed by a specific amount of gold? No. For one of the many reasons is, right now, one Bitcoin will buy you 40 ounces of gold, or something like that. Whatever 60,000 divided by $2,500 is. Whatever that is. Let's call that, 25 ounces or whatever of gold. Anyway, you can get dozens of ounces of gold for one Bitcoin right now. So why the heck would you want every Bitcoin backed by 1 ounce of gold if over time, the amount of gold you can buy with a Bitcoin, it's volatile, obviously, but it goes up. The person who told me I wish every Bitcoin was backed by 1 ounce of gold, I'm like, why the heck would you want that to be the case? Because right now I can buy, over time, as Bitcoin becomes more valuable, I can buy more and more gold as the price of Bitcoin goes up. So why the heck would I want every Bitcoin to represent only 1 ounce of gold? One day I'll be able to buy 100 ounces of gold with one Bitcoin. So that doesn't make any sense. And then second, would Bitcoin be better if it was backed by something physical in the real world? No, because that physical thing in the real world would have a settlement time vastly different from the transaction time. It would suffer from all the same problems that gold does, all the same problems that gold got confiscated with Executive Order 6102 in 1933, all the same reason the US government came off the gold standard in 1971. And if we tried to back Bitcoin by gold or the US dollar by gold, the exact same thing would happen again unless humans magically turned into angels. And if humans magically turned into angels, they wouldn't print too much money and we wouldn't even have to worry about it. So humans are not going to turn into angels, which means if they can debase the monetary system, they will. Debase meaning take away the base, meaning, inflate it away, make too much of it, etc. If humans can do that, they will do that. And the only solution to that is to have a money that is not anchored to something physical like gold that has to exist in the real world. So you need a monetary system that's digital, where the settlement times are measured in seconds or minutes, not months or years. And therefore, you're only trusting, for example, the Bitcoin network for a few seconds or a few minutes, as far as settlement times. And obviously nobody's going to try to print a ton of something that, in those couple minutes. It's super easy to do that over months or years. But everybody's settling up in Bitcoin every 10 minutes. Literally every 10 minutes, the entire Bitcoin network settles. Every 10, it averages 10 minutes. Sometimes it's a little shorter, sometimes it's a little longer. But every time a new Bitcoin block is mined, the entire Bitcoin network, all $1.2 trillion of it right now, settles every 10 minutes. Every 10 minutes. There is no room for rehypothecation, for money printing, and there's no reason to have an abstraction, which is something that represents Bitcoin, because you can just use Bitcoin itself. It does not have the problems with verifiability that gold has. It doesn't have the problems of portability that gold has. It doesn't have the problems of what was it? It was portability, verifiability, and whatever the other one was. Anyway, Bitcoin just doesn't have all of those problems. Now I'm wanting to look. All right, the ones I was highlighting that gold had were primarily divisibility, portability, and divisibility, portability, and it's written to, I can't read, I wrote it too light with an old pencil. Anyway, problems with verifiability, problems with divisibility, and portability. I guess the other was durability, which it is good at. But anyway, so divisibility, portability, and verifiability. It doesn't have, Bitcoin does not have those problems. Therefore, it's not going to go the way of gold. And Bitcoin is ideally suited to be the future monetary system of the world, which will just take time to go through the adoption cycle. So, again, summary, so Bitcoin would be worse off if it was anchored to something physical like gold. Because of gold's problems with settlement, speed of settlement as compared to transactions, we will never go back to a gold standard. And if someone does try to go back to the gold standard, they would use something to represent gold. So, for example, Zimbabwe has done this, right? Where they say, hey, we know you don't trust our money anymore. And obviously, Zimbabwe came out with a $100 trillion bill. Their money got so inflated. And so they said, we're going to back our money by gold again. And they do that just long enough to get people to trust the new currency. And then they rug pull them all over again. So they say, hey, every dollar bill is backed by a gram of gold or whatever it is, or a tiny bit of gold. As soon as everybody trusts them and they get everybody using the new currency with all the trust that's based on gold, they do the exact same thing again, which is they rug pull everybody and they say, turns out thank you for trusting us again to manage your money. But once again, we faked you out and the money's actually not backed by gold and you can't have the gold, and then the government keeps the gold. So they do that over and over and over as long as people will keep falling for it. So we're not going back to a gold standard in the United States. Gold has, the speed of settlement is never going to be good enough due to the portability, divisibility, and authenticatability problems of gold. And therefore, if we went backwards, we'd go back to where we were, which is something that represents gold, while the gold remains settled, and then the gold would get taken away again, like it did, or it would be the ability to redeem it for gold would be taken away, like it was. So the gold got taken away in 1933. The ability to redeem US dollars for gold got taken away in 1971. And if we went back to a gold standard, the exact same thing would happen all over again. So we covered all that. Bitcoin would not be better if it was backed by gold or any other commodity. Gold will never be the monetary system for a digital age due to the problems inherent in the settlement time related to portability, authenticatability, and divisibility. And we know what's going to happen if we go that route. The gold will get taken away, or the redemptibility of gold for US dollars will get taken away. That will always be the case due to human nature. And the only path forward is something that does not have portability, authenticatability, and divisibility problems, but does have the other benefits of gold, like durability and scarcity. And in the case of Bitcoin, it's even more scarce than gold. So Bitcoin is the ideal money because it checks all of those boxes, and it doesn't have the problems gold has with divisibility, authenticatability, and portability. And therefore, it does not have the settlement problems gold has, where it takes months or years to settle up between parties in gold, where they have to physically transport the gold back and forth in armored cars and all of that. Bitcoin does not have that problem. It can all be settled up instantly, and the entire network is settled every 10 minutes. And anyway, so brilliant new monetary system for the world. Bitcoin would not be improved by linking it to something physical in the real world. And the reason we need Bitcoin, of course, is because you can't send gold over the internet. If you could, we would use that. But you can't send gold. Gold is physical. Gold has to be somewhere. And that means inherently it can be taken away. It will be centralized, and it will be represented by paper that supposedly represents gold until it magically doesn't. So hopefully this video is helpful. I don't know how long this thing is. It's probably over 30 minutes now. But I wanted to cover this, and now I have, and hopefully it's helpful. And if you have any questions about this or anything else, let me know. I'm always here for you on your Bitcoin journey. I am more committed to Bitcoin than ever, more certain that Bitcoin is the future monetary system of the world, and more certain than ever that we will not go back to the gold standard. And if you are not convinced, go read Lyn Alden's book, Broken Money, which just came out sometime, I think, in the last 12 or 18 months. Great book. It's obviously pretty, technical, and lots of economics, lots of monetary policy, but it's very well written, and it's not hard to understand if you enjoy that sort of topic. So hopefully this all helps, and I'm here for anything you need. And here we are on the adoption curve of moving to Bitcoin, the new monetary system of the world. Have a great night and a great week ahead. Thanks.